What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Ark Survival Ascended. That's right, we're on the Ragnarok map, and we're here to check out the performance. So, let's get into it. Let's find how good this actually runs. So, first of all, 1440p DLSS is on Ultra, and we're on low settings. This is with frame generation on. We are looking at 68 frames per second, 34 1% lows, and 26 milliseconds of latency. Okay, 1440p DLSS on balanced, and frame gen DLSS is on, and we are on low settings. So we're running at 60 frames per second, 25 1% lows, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. The picture definitely looks a bit better, not gonna lie. Moving on, 1440p DLSS quality settings. Frame gen is on, and we are on low settings. We are getting 53 FPS, 23 1% lows, and a latency of 39 milliseconds. Okay, 1440p DLS on ultra performance, no frame gen on low. We're getting 30 FPS, 10 1% lows, and a latency of 22 milliseconds. Okay, DLSS on balance, no frame gen, 1440p, low settings, 25 FPS, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 39 milliseconds. Okay, DLSS quality settings, no frame gen, on low, 23 FPS, 7 1% lows, and a latency of 39 milliseconds. Okay, moving on. DLSS on ultra performance, DLSS frame gen is on, and now on the medium settings. So everything's going to be medium from here on out. Okay, 58 frames per second, 31 1% lows, and a latency of 33 milliseconds. DLSS on balanced, frame gen on, and medium settings. 1440p, we are looking at 50 FPS, 25 1% lows, latency of 42 milliseconds. Okay, 1440p DLSS quality settings, frame gen on, and we are on medium settings. 45 frames per second, 24 1% lows, and a latency of 45 milliseconds. (1440p) DLSS on ultra performance and no frame gen. Medium settings. 30 frames per second, 12 1% lows, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. (1440p) DLSS on balanced, no frame generation on medium. 23 frames per second, 10 1% lows, and a latency of 60 milliseconds. (1440p) DLSS on quality, no frame generation, on medium settings. 22 frames per second, 7 1% lows, and a latency of 67 milliseconds. Okay, 1440p DLSS on ultra performance, DLSS on, and now we're on the high settings. So we've moved up to high settings for the graphics. 56 frames per second, 31% low, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. (1440p) DLS on balanced, frame gen on, and we're on high settings. 47 frames per second, 24 1% low, and a latency of 40 milliseconds. Okay, 1440p DLSS is on quality, frame gen is on, and we're on high settings for graphics. 43 frames per second, 22 1% lows, and a latency of 47 milliseconds. (1440p resolution, DLS ultra performance, no frame gen, on high settings. 25 frames per second, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 30 milliseconds. (1440p DLSS on balance, no frame gen, on high settings on graphics. We're getting 24 frames per second, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. (1440p DLSS on quality, no frame gen, on high settings on graphics once again. Getting about 22 frames per second, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 44 milliseconds. (1440p DLSS on ultra performance, DLS frame gen turned on, and going up the graphics settings to epic now. Now I know it says the 4070, this is only the 5060. Okay, 54 frames per second, 27 1% lows, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. (1440p DLSS on balanced, frame gen on, epic settings. 43 frames per second, 22 1% lows, and a latency of 45 milliseconds. (1440p DLSS on quality, frame gen turned on epic settings on graphics. We're getting 50 frames per second, 21 1% lows, and a latency of 49 milliseconds. Okay, 1440p DLSS on ultra performance with no frame gen on epic. graphic settings. 27 frames per second, 91% lows, and a latency of 30 milliseconds. DLSS on balance, no frame gen. Graphic settings on epic. We're getting 24 frames per second, 13 1% lows, and a latency of 46 milliseconds. (1440p) DLSS on quality, no frame gen, epic graphic settings. 21 frames per second, 10 1% lows, and a latency of 46 milliseconds. Okay, now no DLS at all, no frame gen at all, nothing at all, 1440p, low settings. We're getting 24 frames per second, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 35 milliseconds. (1440p), no DLSS, no frame gen, nothing at all. Medium settings on graphics. 23 frames per second, 7 1% lows, and a latency of 45 milliseconds. (1440p), no DLSS, no frame gen. On high settings, on graphics. 21 frames per second, 9 1% lows, and a latency of 51 milliseconds. (1440p), no DLSS, frame gen turned off on epic settings on graphics. And we're getting 90 frames per second, 8 1% lows, and a latency of 65 milliseconds. That was 19 frames per second. I don't know if that came out clear. Alright, so that's the performance that we got on Ragnarok. So not too bad. Not as good as what I thought it would be, but not bad at all. So, yeah, we're going to leave this one here. Hopefully you all enjoyed this. Smash the like button. Consider hitting that subscribe. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode. See you later.